A millionaire accidentally saw a strange woman crying at the grave of his late wife. He never expected that a few days later, his son would be crying and begging this woman. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 6, its deep chime resonating through the mansion like a patient reminder of time's steady march. The golden light of the late afternoon sun stretched through the high windows, spilling over the marble floors, casting long, elegant shadows that stretched toward the grand staircase. Outside, beyond the manicured hedges and stone pathways, the city pulsed with life. Horns blaring, distant chatter, the rush of an evening commute. But within the walls of the Hayes estate, the world stood still. In the expansive living room, Raymond Hayes sat with his laptop balanced on his knee, his fingers moving methodically across the keys. His dark, tailored suit was still crisp from the day's meetings, but his tie had been loosened, a rare concession to comfort. The glow of the screen reflected in his sharp, thoughtful eyes, the same steel grey that Sean had inherited. Across from him, sprawled lazily on the oversized leather couch, 10-year-old Sean was watching a nature documentary with exaggerated interest. His sock-clad feet were propped against the armrest, his head hanging upside down over the edge, his mop of unruly brown hair threatening to brush the floor. He sighed dramatically. "Dad," he drawled, dragging out the syllable like a teenager twice his age. "You ever notice how you and that lion on TV have the same expression? You know, the one that says, 'I have too much responsibility and not enough naps.'" Raymond didn't look up from his laptop. "Lions don't handle corporate mergers, Sean." "No, but they do handle entire prides," Sean countered, flipping right side up with a mischievous grin. "And let's be honest, your board of directors, pretty much the same thing. A bunch of people trying to steal your food and assert dominance." Raymond let out a quiet breath that was almost a chuckle, though his expression barely shifted. "Is that so?" Sean stretched his arms above his head, letting out an exaggerated yawn. "Yep. The difference is, the lion actually gets a social life. You, on the other hand, work all day, come home, and work some more. Dad, when was the last time you did something fun?" "I find work fulfilling." "Ah," Sean nodded solemnly. "So, in other words, never." Raymond finally closed the laptop and gave his son a pointed look. "And what do you suggest I do for fun? Join your elaborate plots to convince Mrs. Davenport that the house is haunted?" Sean gasped in mock outrage. "That was a strategic social experiment. We had to see if she believed in ghosts before I tried to convince her I had a long-lost twin." "You don't have a long-lost twin." "Exactly. That's what makes it genius." Raymond sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose, but the corners of his mouth betrayed the hint of a smirk. "You're impossible. I prefer creative." Silence settled between them, comfortable and familiar. The documentary droned on in the background, the narrator explaining the migration patterns of wildebeests, but neither of them was really listening. Sean turned to glance at his father, his teasing expression softening just a little. "Hey, Dad." His voice was quieter now, hesitant. Raymond looked up, sensing the shift. "Can we visit Mom this weekend?" The request was simple, but the weight of it settled into the space between them. Raymond's expression didn't change much. He had always been good at keeping emotions beneath the surface. But Sean knew his father well enough to notice the slight pause before he answered, the way his fingers flexed slightly on the closed laptop. "Of course," Raymond said, his voice steady, though softer than before. "We'll go first thing Saturday morning." Sean nodded, not pushing for more. He had learned over the years that grief was something his father carried quietly, like an old injury that never quite healed, but wasn't often spoken of. Raymond leaned back against the armrest, watching as Sean turned his attention back to the screen, his fingers idly tugging at the hem of his sweater. He had his mother's smile, soft, warm, effortlessly expressive. A moment later, Sean shifted closer, leaning his head against his father's shoulder, his voice laced with casual nonchalance. "Just so you know, if you ever decide to get married again, I fully expect to be part of the interview process." Raymond snorted. "Noted." Sean grinned. "I'll need a full resume, references, a 5-minute PowerPoint presentation on why they'd make a good stepmom. You know, the essentials." Raymond ruffled his hair, earning a dramatic groan of protest. "I'll keep that in mind." And just like that, the weight in the air lifted. They fell into silence again, watching as the lions moved across the African plains, the evening light stretching long across their living room floor. Outside, the city moved on without them, fast and unrelenting. But inside the walls of their home, time moved differently, steadier, quieter, held together by small moments and unspoken understanding. And in those moments, that was enough. A crisp wind rustled through the trees, sending golden leaves skittering across the stone pathway. The late afternoon sun filtered through the branches, casting a warm but fleeting glow over the rows of gravestones. Somewhere in the distance, the faint caw of a crow echoed through the quiet cemetery. Raymond walked with steady, measured steps, the bouquet of white lilies resting gently in his hand. His son, Sean, trailed slightly behind, kicking at loose pebbles on the path, his usual air of playfulness dampened by the solemn atmosphere. Sean never quite knew what to say during these visits. He didn't remember his mother in the way his father did. For him, Mary was more of a feeling than a memory, a presence in old photographs, in the way his father sometimes sat in silence for too long, in the lilies that Raymond never failed to bring. As they neared the familiar grave, something unusual caught Sean's eye. A woman stood just a few feet away, her back turned to them, her shoulders trembling. She held a small handkerchief in one hand, pressing it lightly against her face. Sean tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad," he whispered, nodding in the woman's direction. "She's crying." Raymond followed his son's gaze, his expression unreadable. He hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Let's check if she's all right." They approached carefully, not wanting to intrude. The woman didn't seem to notice them at first, lost in whatever sorrow had brought her there. She sniffled, taking a deep breath, as though trying to steady herself. Raymond spoke first, his voice calm but firm. "Excuse me, miss. Are you all right?" The woman startled slightly, turning to them with red-rimmed eyes. She looked to be in her late 30s, maybe early 40s, with soft auburn hair loosely pulled back, wisps escaping to frame her face. She blinked at them, clearly caught off guard, her gaze flicking between the two strangers standing before her. She exhaled, wiping at her cheeks quickly. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize anyone was here." Sean tilted his head, ever curious. "Are you visiting someone special?" The woman hesitated before glancing back at the headstone she had been standing in front of. "Mary Hayes," she said softly, almost to herself. Something in Raymond's expression shifted. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" She turned back to him, a bit confused. "Mary Hayes," she repeated, nodding toward the grave. "She was my friend. A long time ago." Raymond's grip on the lilies tightened. "This is my wife's grave. I have never met him before or seen him in any of Mary's friends' photos." A long pause settled between them, stretching uncomfortably. The woman blinked, clearly startled. I think there must be some mistake." Sean, always one to latch onto an interesting mystery, leaned closer to his father and muttered, "Dad, are you sure you were actually married? Maybe she had another husband." Raymond shot him a look, but Sean's smirk barely faltered. The woman, however, had no hint of humor in her face. "You were married to her?" she asked, brows furrowing deeply. "That can't be right." Raymond's patience, already thin from the weight of the visit, wore even thinner. "I assure you it is." The woman shook her head, looking genuinely bewildered. "No, that's impossible. Mary never told me she was married." Raymond's chest tightened at the certainty in her voice. "Who exactly are you?" "Dorothy Clark," she answered, a trace of hesitation in her tone. "We were friends in high school, but I left the country years ago. I only just got back. I wanted to find her, but—" She exhaled, gesturing at the grave. "I was too late." Raymond remained silent for a long moment. He had no recollection of his wife ever mentioning a Dorothy Clark. "You said she never told you she was married?" he finally asked. Dorothy shook her head, looking increasingly unsettled. "Never. We used to talk about everything, our dreams, our plans, what we wanted out of life. But she never mentioned a husband. Not once." Sean, eyes flicking between them like he was watching a particularly intriguing chess match, finally chimed in. "So, what if there were two Mary Hayeses?" Raymond exhaled, rubbing his temple. "That's not likely. But not impossible," Sean countered. Dorothy still looked troubled, staring at the name etched into the stone. "I need to be sure," she murmured. Raymond studied her for a moment before giving a slow nod. "Then let's check with the cemetery manager." Dorothy glanced at him, surprised by his willingness to help, but nodded. "All right." Sean let out an exaggerated sigh, slipping his hands into his pockets. Well, this visit took an unexpected turn. Raymond gave him a side glance. "Not everything needs commentary." Sean grinned. "You say that, but without me, this would be an incredibly awkward silence." Despite himself, Raymond let out a breath, something dangerously close to amusement. Dorothy, even in her confusion, let out a small, startled laugh. And just like that, for a moment, the heavy air around them lightened. But the questions remained. The cemetery office was tucked behind a row of towering oak trees, its modest structure blending into the landscape of stone and silence. A bell chimed softly as Raymond pushed the door open, holding it for Dorothy, who still looked shaken. Sean trailed behind them, hands stuffed into his jacket pockets, his expression bright with intrigue rather than grief. Inside, a man in his 60s sat behind an old wooden desk, flipping through a yellowed ledger, his reading glasses perched at the end of his nose, and he glanced up at their arrival with mild curiosity. "Good afternoon," he greeted, setting his pen down. "How can I help you?" Raymond stepped forward. "There seems to be a discrepancy regarding a burial." The man's expression shifted from neutral to professional. "Name of the deceased?" Dorothy was the one to answer. "Mary Hayes." The cemetery manager nodded and began flipping through his records. The scratch of paper against paper filled the room, the sound strangely loud in the quiet space. Sean leaned toward his father and whispered, "This is like a detective novel. Do you think they'll let us solve a crime next?" Raymond sighed. "Let's start with solving this mix-up." Dorothy shot Sean an amused look, despite her nerves, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. The manager stopped on a page and adjusted his glasses. "Mary Hayes," he repeated, scanning the details. "Born in 1982, passed in 2018, buried in Section C, Lot 45. Raymond nodded. "That's my wife." The manager hummed in acknowledgement, then frowned and flipped to another page. "But we also have another Mary Hayes," he said, tapping the book. "Born in 1982, passed in 2018, buried in Section F, Lot 12. Dorothy blinked. "What?" Sean, ever one to seize an opportunity, gasped dramatically. Dad, what if Mom had a long-lost twin or a secret identity? Raymond gave him a look that immediately silenced further theories, but Dorothy still looked mortified. "Oh, no," she muttered, pressing her hands to her face. I was crying at the wrong grave." Sean, never one to miss comedic gold, broke into a wide grin. "I think we need to get you glasses, Miss Dorothy. You almost made my dad think he had a secret wife." Raymond pinched the bridge of his nose, fighting a smirk, but Dorothy, despite her embarrassment, let out a small, helpless laugh. "This is so humiliating." Raymond, ever the composed one, turned back to the manager. "Thank you for checking the records. Can you direct Miss Clark to the correct site?" "Of course," the manager said, marking a spot on a map and handing it to Dorothy. "Lot 12 is about a 5-minute walk from here." Dorothy took the paper with a deep breath. "Thank you." Sean rocked back on his heels. "Well, that was exciting. I mean, if you think about it, this is kind of a good mistake." Dorothy raised an eyebrow. "Oh? Well," Sean said, his grin mischievous, "now you get to buy us coffee as an apology." Raymond groaned. "Sean, no, he's right," Dorothy cut in, sighing with a sheepish smile. "I owe you both for the confusion. Let me make it up to you." Raymond hesitated, but Sean was already nodding enthusiastically. "See, Dad? Miss Dorothy is a woman of integrity." Raymond exhaled. "All right. But you're not getting extra sugar in your drink." Sean gasped in mock horror. "What is this? A punishment?" Dorothy chuckled, shaking her head as they stepped back out into the crisp autumn air. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting the sky in a muted palette of gold and violet. As they made their way toward the parking lot, Sean nudged Dorothy with an easy grin. "Hey, look at the bright side. You might have gotten the wrong Mary, but at least now you've got us." Dorothy laughed, a sound lighter than before, and Raymond, despite himself, felt something unfamiliar in his chest, a loosening, a shift, something that almost felt like the beginning of something new. The cafe smelled of fresh brewed espresso and warm pastries, the kind of place where time seemed to slow down. Golden light streamed in through the tall windows, casting soft shadows on wooden tables, where people sat hunched over laptops, lost in books, or murmuring in hushed conversations. A barista worked methodically behind the counter, the steam from the milk frother curling in delicate swirls above her head. Dorothy stepped inside first, still slightly flushed from the earlier embarrassment, but her shoulders had relaxed now, the tension giving way to something lighter. Raymond followed, his presence as composed as ever, though there was an almost imperceptible ease in his movements. Sean, however, strode in like he owned the place, his grin still firmly in place. "I say, we get the biggest, most expensive drinks on the menu," Sean declared as they approached the counter. Raymond shot him a dry look. "We are not taking advantage of Miss Clark's generosity." Sean turned to Dorothy. "You don't mind, do you?" Dorothy laughed, shaking her head as she studied the menu. "I did say I owed you both, but I draw the line at $10 milkshakes." Sean sighed, dramatic as ever. "Fine, but just so you know, Miss Dorothy, this will affect your Yelp rating." Raymond exhaled sharply, but Dorothy only chuckled, thoroughly entertained by the boy's antics. After ordering black coffee for Raymond, a cappuccino for Dorothy, and hot chocolate for Sean, they settled into a corner booth. The cafe had that cozy, slightly lived-in feel, the hum of conversation mixing with the occasional clang of dishes from the kitchen. For the first few minutes, there was only the sound of stirring drinks and the comfortable rustling of napkins. Then, Sean, naturally, broke the silence. "So, Miss Dorothy, what exactly were you doing in Europe while my mum was here, wondering why you never wrote back?" Raymond nearly choked on his coffee. Dorothy, on the other hand, let out a startled laugh, caught between amusement and horror. "Excuse me?" Sean leaned forward, grinning. "I mean, you two were best friends, right? And then you just vanished. You abandoned her for an adventure, didn't you?" Dorothy shook her head, laughing softly. "You have a way of making things sound much more dramatic than they were, Sean." "I get that from Dad," Sean said, jerking a thumb toward Raymond, who gave him a look that was equal parts exasperation and fondness. Dorothy smiled, stirring the foam of her cappuccino. "It wasn't exactly an adventure. I got a scholarship to study in London, and one thing led to another. Work, travel, life just kept moving forward. I always meant to come back sooner, but time slips away faster than you expect." Sean's playful expression softened slightly. "Yeah, I guess it does." Dorothy glanced between father and son, sensing something unspoken in the air. Raymond hadn't said much since they sat down, but he was listening. She could see it in the way he held his cup, in the way his gaze rested on her, assessing but not unkind. "You two must have a lot of stories together," Raymond said finally, his voice even, but there was something almost tentative about it. Dorothy nodded. "Plenty?" She hesitated for a second before adding, "Mary, I mean my friend she was full of life. She had this way of making everything seem bigger, more exciting than it really was. She always had a plan, never wanted to stay still for too long." Sean perked up. "That's funny. Dad's the exact opposite. He likes plans because they keep everything still." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "That's not entirely true." Sean leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Name one time you did something spontaneous." Raymond opened his mouth, paused, then took a sip of his coffee instead. Dorothy laughed. "He's got you there." Sean grinned. "See, Miss Dorothy, this is why you owe us at least 10 hot chocolates." "My dad hasn't had fun since 2005. Raymond sighed, shaking his head, but Dorothy caught the way his lips quirked, just slightly. The conversation drifted, moving from childhood memories to travel stories, to books Dorothy had read and places she had seen. Sean, captivated, listened intently as she described Christmas markets in Germany, the canals of Amsterdam, the tiny bookstore in Paris she had once gotten lost in for hours. "That sounds incredible," he said, eyes wide. "I bet my dad's never even left the country." Raymond rolled his eyes. "I travel for work." "Yeah, but do you enjoy it?" Sean countered. Raymond didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. Dorothy watched them, the banter easy, unforced. She had spent so much of the last few years in transit, meeting new people only to say goodbye just as quickly. But there was something grounding about this moment, something familiar, yet entirely new. Sean finished his hot chocolate and wiped his mouth with the back of his sleeve. "All right, Miss Dorothy. Final verdict. You're okay?" Dorothy feigned relief. "Thank goodness." "You're still not getting a 5-star rating, though." Dorothy laughed. "Fair enough." Raymond set down his empty cup and glanced at the time. "We should head out." Dorothy nodded, and as they gathered their things, she realized she wasn't quite ready to say goodbye just yet. As they stepped outside, the evening air had cooled, carrying the scent of autumn, wood smoke, fallen leaves, something crisp and fleeting. Sean stretched, then looked up at her. "So, are you planning to stick around this time?" Dorothy blinked. Sean tilted his head. "You're not going to disappear to, like, Australia or something, right?" Raymond shot him a look, but Dorothy only smiled, something thoughtful passing through her expression. "No," she said after a moment. "I think I'll be staying." Sean grinned. "Good, because Dad needs new friends. And if I leave him alone too long, he just turns into a grumpy businessman again. Raymond sighed. Sean. Sean beamed at Dorothy. See you soon, Miss Dorothy. She laughed, watching as father and son walked ahead, their bickering fading into the quiet hum of the city. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about where she would go next. For the first time in a long time, she was exactly where she needed to be. The city moved with a quiet rhythm in the early morning hours, cars humming softly over damp streets, pedestrians bundled in coats hurrying to their destinations, the scent of freshly baked bread wafting from a nearby bakery. Inside the towering glass building of Hayes Global, the atmosphere was different, crisp, methodical, charged with the quiet energy of professionals beginning their workday. Raymond walked through the executive floor with his usual composed stride, his assistant keeping pace beside him. The morning briefing was routine. Stock performance, internal reports, a minor logistics issue in their European branch. But his mind, frustratingly, wasn't as focused as it should have been. Dorothy. It wasn't that their cafe conversation had been particularly significant. It was just lingering, the ease with which she had spoken, the way Sean had taken to her so effortlessly, the odd familiarity of her presence despite only knowing her for a few hours. He shook the thought aside as he entered the boardroom, nodding to the gathered executives. They were here to welcome the new senior manager, someone with extensive experience and a strong background in international business, a valuable addition to the company. Raymond adjusted his cufflinks, his mind already shifting into work mode, as his assistant introduced the new hire. Please welcome Dorothy Clark, our new senior manager overseeing strategic partnerships. For a brief moment, time hiccuped. Dorothy! Raymond's head lifted sharply, and across the room, standing near the projector screen in a sleek navy blazer, was her, the same Dorothy Clark who had mistaken his wife's grave for someone else's, who had laughed over coffee with Sean just days ago, who had looked at him with easy amusement when he struggled to name a single spontaneous decision in his life. Her eyes widened slightly, mirroring his surprise, before a slow, knowing smile spread across her lips. Of all the companies in the city, she cleared her throat, regaining her composure. It's an honor to be here. I'm looking forward to working with all of you. Raymond, ever the professional, masked his reaction quickly. He gave a slight nod, his expression unreadable. Welcome to Hayes Global, Miss Clark. A slight pause, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. This should be interesting, she murmured under her breath as she took her seat. By mid-morning, the initial meetings had concluded, and Dorothy had been briefed on the company's expectations. If she was thrown by the unexpected reunion, she didn't show it. She moved through the office with quiet confidence, already reviewing proposals and familiarizing herself with internal reports. Raymond, on the other hand, was still adjusting. He didn't question her qualifications. Her resume had been stellar, her reputation well-earned. What unsettled him was the way she seemed to fit so effortlessly into this world of structured efficiency, as though she had been here all along. Sean, of course, found out within hours. Maybe some assistant told this to him. His father had barely stepped into his office when his phone buzzed with an incoming message. Sean, Dad, why didn't you tell me Dorothy works for you now? This is the best thing that has ever happened. Raymond sighed, rubbing his temple. He didn't have the energy to dissect why Sean was so excited, nor did he have the opportunity, because minutes later, his son walked through his office door, grinning from ear to ear. Why do you look so pleased? Raymond asked dryly. Because, Sean said, plopping down into one of the leather chairs, this means I get to see Miss Dorothy all the time. You know, my partner in crime. Raymond leaned back in his chair. That title does not instill confidence. Sean grinned. Relax, Dad. I'm just saying this is a good thing. She's cool, and let's be honest, you could use a little socialization that isn't related to hostile takeovers or shareholder meetings. Raymond gave him a look. I socialize. Sean snorted. With whom? Raymond opened his mouth, paused, then exhaled. That's not the point. Sean smirked, kicking his feet up on the chair. Anyway, I'm going to go say hi to my new best friend. See you later, boss. Raymond watched as his son waltzed out of the office like he owned the place. Dorothy wasn't even technically his employee, yet somehow she was already causing disruptions. Dorothy had expected her new job to be challenging. Stepping into a leadership role at a major firm always came with growing pains. But she hadn't expected this level of amusement so early on. Sean had found her within minutes of arriving on the executive floor, greeting her with an over-the-top bow and immediately launching into an enthusiastic recap of his top 5 favorite moments from their coffee outing. Raymond, she noticed, was keeping his distance, not in a cold way, just observing, measuring. It was clear he wasn't quite sure what to do with the fact that their paths had unexpectedly intertwined again. Later that afternoon, she ran into him near the conference rooms, both of them reaching for the same elevator button. I didn't take you for the corporate type, Raymond remarked as they stepped inside. Dorothy smirked. And I didn't take you for someone who's so easily thrown off his game. His lips twitched, but he didn't rise to the bait. I wasn't expecting to see you here, that's all. She leaned against the elevator wall, crossing her arms. Would you believe me if I said it's just a coincidence? Raymond studied her for a moment before responding. Yes, but I also believe Sean has already devised a plan to make sure you never leave this company. Dorothy laughed. He does seem a little invested. That's one way to put it. A comfortable silence settled between them as the elevator descended. It was strange, this ease that seemed to exist between them despite their brief acquaintance, as if they had known each other in another life and were simply picking up where they had left off. As the doors slid open, Dorothy stepped out first, pausing only to glance back at him with a small, knowing smile. See you at the next meeting, boss. Raymond sighed, stepping out behind her. Sean, he was sure, was never going to let this go. The office had its own rhythm, a quiet symphony of phones ringing, the soft murmur of conversations, the rhythmic tapping of keyboards. The executive floor, usually a world of precise efficiency, had subtly shifted in energy over the past week, and Raymond knew exactly why. Dorothy. Her presence, while professional, carried a lightness that was rare in the corporate world. People laughed more around her, meetings felt less rigid. Even he noticed the way conversations flowed easier in her presence. And Sean, of course, was thriving on this new development. If Raymond had thought his son's excitement would wane, he had been sorely mistaken. Sean had fully committed to his self-appointed role as matchmaker. Strategic coincidences. It started small. Raymond would exit a meeting, only to find Dorothy in the hallway, smirking as if she knew something he didn't. Or he'd be in the middle of reviewing reports when his assistant would casually mention, "Oh, Dorothy Clark just dropped off these documents. She was here a minute ago." Then there was Sean. One afternoon, Raymond walked into the office lounge, intending to grab a coffee, only to find Dorothy already there, sitting comfortably at one of the high-top tables. Across from her, Sean, sipping hot chocolate like he belonged there. "Ah, Dad," Sean grinned. "Perfect timing. Miss Dorothy and I were just talking about important company matters." Raymond gave them both a look. "You do realize you don't work here, right?" Sean took a leisurely sip of his drink. "Technicalities." Dorothy, suppressing a smile, gestured to the chair beside her. Care to join us, boss? Raymond sighed, but he sat down anyway. Sean, visibly pleased, leaned back in his chair. You know, Miss Dorothy, I've been thinking. My dad's life is tragically predictable. Wake up, work, scowl, work some more, occasionally sleep. It's a wonder he hasn't turned into a corporate robot yet. Raymond pinched the bridge of his nose. Sean? Sean turned to Dorothy with a dramatic sigh. It's really up to you to save him at this point. Dorothy leaned forward, feigning deep concern. That does sound serious. Are there any known cures for extreme businessman syndrome? Very few, Sean said gravely, but exposure to fun has been known to help. Raymond exhaled slowly. Are you two finished? Sean grinned. Never. Dorothy laughed, and for the first time in a long while, Raymond found himself enjoying the unexpected detours. The growing buzz, people noticed. Dorothy was good at her job. There was no question about that. She handled negotiations with sharp efficiency, streamlined processes without stepping on egos, and had a knack for diffusing tense discussions. But it wasn't just her competence that had the office buzzing. It was the way Raymond had changed. More than one employee had exchanged knowing glances when they saw them talking. There was something about the way Dorothy challenged him, how she matched his sharp remarks with her own, how she had made Sean her unofficial office liaison. Raymond, to his credit, pretended not to notice. Sean, however, did not. One afternoon, Dorothy was reviewing documents in the common area when Sean strolled in unannounced, plopping into the seat beside her. Miss Dorothy, he said, his voice grave, you've bewitched my father. Dorothy blinked. What? Sean leaned in. Should I be worried? Is this part of a grand plan? Dorothy burst out laughing, setting her pen down. Sean, I promise I'm not plotting against your father. Sean tapped his chin. That's exactly what someone secretly plotting would say. Dorothy smirked. You're impossible. Sean grinned. Runs in the family. From across the room, Raymond watched the exchange unfold, taking a slow sip of his coffee. He didn't say anything, but for the first time in a long time, he felt something shift, something unfamiliar, something dangerously close to belonging. The city outside pulsed with life, the rhythm of horns and distant voices blending into the hum of late-night traffic. Inside Hayes Global, the atmosphere was starkly different. The usual energy of the office had faded into a hushed stillness, the fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow over the empty desks and glass-paneled hallways. Most employees had already left for the night, except for Raymond. And Sean. The 10-year-old sat curled up in the lounge area just outside his father's office, legs dangling over the edge of the plush chair, his book propped on his lap. He was supposed to be doing homework, at least that's what Raymond had told him when he insisted on waiting there. Instead, he was only half reading, his eyes flicking toward the office door every few minutes. His father had been in there for hours. Sean sighed, drumming his fingers against the armrest before grabbing his phone. Dad, I'm bored. Are you still alive in there, or did you become one with the spreadsheets? Blink twice if you need rescuing. No response. Sean narrowed his eyes. That wasn't unusual. His father had an impressive talent for ignoring distractions when he was working, but something felt off. He slid out of his chair, padded toward the office, and knocked. Dad? Silence. Frowning, he tried the handle and pushed the door open. Raymond sat at his desk, posture slumped, fingers gripping the bridge of his nose. Papers were scattered across the surface. Contracts, financial reports, unread messages blinking on his computer screen. But what sent a jolt of unease through Sean was the way his father looked. Pale, tense, unsteady. "Dad?" Sean stepped closer. Raymond inhaled sharply, as if startled by his presence. His eyes were slightly unfocused when he looked up. "Sean, I told you to wait outside." Sean didn't move. Something was wrong. His father looked exhausted in a way that was different from his usual late-night work sessions. His breathing was off. And then, Raymond swayed slightly in his chair before his body went completely limp, his head dropping forward onto his desk. For a single, horrifying second, the world stilled. Then Sean's stomach dropped. "Dad!" He ran forward, shaking him. Nothing. A wild panic surged in his chest, his breath coming in uneven bursts as he fumbled for his phone. His fingers trembled as he tapped the screen, his brain scrambling for what to do. "Sean. Miss Dorothy. Dad's not waking up. Help." Then, without waiting for a response, he bolted. Dorothy's office. Moments before Dorothy was packing up her things when her phone buzzed on the desk. "Sean." She frowned, swiping to read the message, then froze. Her heart lurched. She was out the door before she could think, sprinting down the hallway toward Raymond's office. When she reached it, Sean was pacing outside, his face pale, his hands gripping the hem of his sweater. He turned the moment he saw her, his voice high and panicked. "He won't wake up," Sean gasped. I called him, I shook him, but..." Dorothy didn't waste a second. She pushed past him, rushing inside. Raymond was slumped forward, his face obscured by his arm. His breathing was shallow, his complexion worryingly pale. Dorothy didn't hesitate. She grabbed her phone, her voice sharp and clear as she dialed. "Yes, this is Dorothy Clark. We need an ambulance at Hayes Global, executive floor. Unresponsive male, late 40s, breathing but unconscious." Sean stood frozen, his chest rising and falling too fast, his fingers gripping the edge of the desk. Dorothy turned toward him, voice steady but firm. "Sean, look at me." He did, wide-eyed, terrified. "Help is coming," she said, "but right now, I need you to take deep breaths. Can you do that for me?" Sean tried, but his breath hitched. He's going to be okay," Dorothy interrupted, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We're not going to think otherwise, okay?" Sean nodded quickly, but he didn't let go of his father's sleeve. Dorothy turned back to Raymond, her own hands trembling slightly as she reached for his wrist to check his pulse. It was there, but faint. "Come on, Raymond," she murmured under her breath. "Not like this." The next few minutes stretched into an eternity. And then, the paramedics arrived. Sean sat in the waiting room, his small hands clenched into fists, his knee bouncing restlessly. Dorothy sat beside him, her coat draped over the back of her chair, her own nerves barely contained beneath her calm exterior. Sean had barely spoken since they arrived. Dorothy watched him for a moment before gently saying, "He's stable." Sean gave a sharp nod, but his throat worked as if he were holding something back. And then, quietly, so quietly, she almost didn't hear it, "I can't lose him too." Dorothy's chest tightened. She reached out, taking his hand without thinking. Sean gripped it immediately, as if he had been waiting for something solid to hold on to. "I already lost my mum," he whispered, his voice cracking. "And if something happens to Dad, His words broke off. Dorothy's throat burned, but she kept her voice steady. "Sean," she said softly, "your dad is strong and stubborn. He's not going anywhere." Sean sniffed, blinking quickly. "You can't promise that." Dorothy squeezed his hand. "No," she admitted, "but I can promise that you're not alone." Sean stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded, and for the first time that night, he let himself breathe. A rhythmic beeping echoed softly in the dim hospital room. the glow of the monitors casting faint shadows against the sterile white walls. The steady rise and fall of Raymond's chest was the only sign of life beneath the crisp hospital sheets. Sean sat hunched over in a chair beside the bed, his elbows resting on his knees, fingers laced together. His usually mischievous eyes were red-rimmed, his face set in an expression that didn't belong on a 10-year-old. Dorothy sat beside him, her presence a quiet anchor in the tense room. The exhaustion of the night clung to her shoulders, but she wasn't leaving, not yet. Then, a groggy breath, a slow inhale. Raymond stirred. Sean bolted upright, his hands gripping the armrest. Dorothy felt him tense beside her, holding his breath. Raymond's eyelids flickered open, unfocused at first, blinking sluggishly against the bright overhead light. Then, his gaze landed on Sean, and before Raymond could say a word, "If you wanted attention, Dad, collapsing is not the way to do it," Sean snapped. Raymond exhaled a quiet laugh, weak, but real. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "Noted?" Sean glared at him, but his lower lip trembled slightly. Dorothy's chest tightened. "Don't ever do that again," Sean muttered, crossing his arms. "You scared me." Raymond's expression softened. His hand moved, slow, heavy with fatigue, until it rested over Sean's. "I'm sorry, kid." Sean sniffed, but nodded, staring down at their joined hands. Dorothy sat quietly, watching the moment unfold. When Raymond finally glanced at her, his tired grey eyes holding something unspoken, she let out a slow breath. "You're an idiot," she told him, voice even. Raymond smirked faintly. "That's new." Dorothy shook her head, exhaling through her nose. "You push yourself until you collapse at your desk. Do you have any idea what that put Sean through?" Raymond's smirk faltered. His gaze flickered to his son. Sean looked away. The weight of the moment settled between them. Raymond ran a hand down his face. "I know," he murmured. He sighed. "I didn't think." Dorothy leaned forward, elbows resting on her knees. "You never think when it comes to yourself, do you?" Raymond didn't answer. Dorothy continued, her voice quieter. Sean was terrified. He didn't know what to do, and neither did I. Sean's grip on the blanket tightened. Raymond closed his eyes briefly, exhaling through his nose. A long silence stretched between them. Then, finally. "I can't keep doing this," Raymond admitted. His voice was low, almost like he was speaking more to himself than to them. "I thought if I just kept working, I wouldn't have to—" He stopped, shaking his head. "It doesn't matter." Dorothy studied him, waiting. Raymond glanced at Sean, his throat working before he finally said, "I can't let my job come before you." Sean lifted his head, his brows furrowed. "Then don't." Raymond nodded slowly. "I won't." Dorothy didn't realize she had been holding her breath until she let it out. Raymond looked at her again, his gaze searching. "I should probably thank you." Dorothy shrugged. "You can thank me by not dying at your desk." Raymond chuckled, shaking his head. "I'll do my best." A pause. Something unspoken settled between them. Dorothy cleared her throat. "You scared me too, you know." Raymond blinked, something shifting in his expression. "I don't know how or when, but somehow, in this short amount of time." Dorothy hesitated, pressing her lips together before saying, "I care about you, both of you." Raymond didn't look away. Sean, eyes flicking between them, sat up suddenly. "Oh my God," he groaned. Dorothy frowned. "What?" Sean threw his hands in the air. "Are you two going to kiss, or should I leave?" Dorothy choked on air. Raymond covered his face with his hand. "Sean," Raymond muttered. Sean smirked, clearly enjoying their reactions. "I'm just saying, if this is a thing, I'd like some warning before my father suddenly starts being romantic." Dorothy buried her face in her hands, laughing helplessly. "Oh my God, Sean." Raymond sighed, but he was smiling, and in that moment, something clicked into place. Dorothy didn't know what this was yet, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going anywhere. The sun had just begun to set, painting the city skyline in strokes of amber and rose. Through the large windows of Raymond's penthouse, the golden light stretched long across the polished hardwood floor, casting soft, shifting shadows. Sean sat cross-legged on the couch, absent-mindedly flipping through a comic book, but his real focus was on his father, who stood near the kitchen island, nursing a glass of water with far too much intensity. Sean smirked. "So," he said, drawing out the word, "when are you going to ask Miss Dorothy out?" Raymond nearly choked. He set the glass down with deliberate care, shooting his son a flat look. "Sean." "What?" Sean's grin widened. "I think I've been very patient. You've been making heart eyes at her for weeks. It's embarrassing, honestly." Raymond pinched the bridge of his nose. "I do not make heart eyes." Sean leaned forward. "Dad, if you don't tell her, I will. And trust me, my version will be dramatic." Raymond exhaled, shaking his head. "You're impossible." Sean beamed. "Runs in the family." Raymond sighed, rubbing his temple. But even as he tried to ignore his son's antics, there was no denying the truth of his words. Dorothy had become a constant. She had slipped into their lives so seamlessly that the thought of her not being there felt wrong. And if Sean, his 10-year-old, perceptive, far too smart for his own good son, had noticed, then it was time he stopped pretending he didn't feel the same. Dinner plans and nerves. Raymond didn't ask her out immediately. That would have been too easy. Instead, he spent the entire morning overthinking it. By the time lunchtime rolled around, he had convinced himself that this was a terrible idea, which was exactly when Dorothy knocked on his office door. "Hey," she said, stepping inside, holding a stack of files. "You free for a minute?" Raymond cleared his throat. "Yes." She set the files on his desk, crossing her arms. "You've been weird today." Raymond blinked. "Weird?" Dorothy raised an eyebrow. "Yes. You were actually quiet in the morning meeting. You didn't argue with Eric over the quarterly projections. And most concerningly, you didn't roll your eyes at Sean's text message." Raymond sighed, leaning back. "Maybe I'm just having a productive day." Dorothy smirked. "Or maybe something's on your mind." Raymond hesitated. This was it. The moment. "Would you have dinner with me?" Dorothy blinked. Raymond kept his face neutral, but internally, he was bracing for impact. Then, a slow smile spread across Dorothy's lips, something warm and knowing. "Took you long enough," she said. Raymond exhaled, somewhere between relief and amusement. "You knew?" he asked. Dorothy chuckled. "Raymond, everyone knew." Raymond shook his head, but the tension in his shoulders eased. "So, is that a yes?" Dorothy tilted her head, pretending to think. "Well, I don't know. I was going to wash my hair tonight." Raymond gave her a flat look. Dorothy grinned. "It's a yes." Sean's reaction. Sean had not so subtly positioned himself near the door when Raymond returned home that evening. The moment his father walked in, he pounced. "Well?" Sean demanded, arms crossed. Raymond sighed, setting his coat down. "It's not a national emergency, Sean." "That's debatable." Sean narrowed his eyes. "Did you ask her out?" Raymond met his son's gaze evenly. "Yes?" Sean grinned. "And?" Raymond smirked. "She said yes." Sean threw his arms in the air. "Finally." Raymond shook his head, amused. I don't know why you're acting like this is your victory." "Because it is," Sean said, smug. "I've been orchestrating this for weeks." Raymond chuckled. "Well, congratulations then." Sean flopped onto the couch dramatically. "Ugh, thank God. I was starting to worry I'd have to set up a fake emergency just to force you two together." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "Please don't." Sean grinned. "No promises." As Sean went back to his comic book, Raymond felt something settle in his chest, something lighter. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a structured plan. It felt like possibility. The cemetery was quiet, the morning air crisp as sunlight filtered through the trees. A soft wind carried the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves, making the moment feel almost suspended in time. The gravel path crunched lightly beneath their footsteps as Raymond, Dorothy, and Sean walked together, moving toward Mary's grave. For years, this visit had been Raymond's private ritual, a quiet moment between him and the woman he had loved and lost. He had never imagined bringing someone else here, let alone Dorothy. But as he glanced at her, holding a small bouquet of white lilies, Mary's favorite, he didn't feel discomfort, just a strange sense of rightness. Beside them, Sean was uncharacteristically quiet. His usual easy chatter had faded, replaced with something more thoughtful. He walked with his hands in his jacket pockets, his gaze flickering between his father and Dorothy. "So," Sean finally said, breaking the silence, "how do we do this?" Raymond looked down at him. "Do what?" Sean shrugged. "Talk to Mum. It's kinda weird with more people here." Raymond exhaled slowly. "You just say what you need to say." Sean nodded, thinking it over. They reached the grave, the polished marble standing as a silent marker of the past that had shaped them. Raymond set down his own bouquet first, his fingers brushing lightly over Mary's name. Dorothy followed, placing her flowers beside his. For a while, none of them spoke. The moment stretched, not uncomfortable, but full. Then, Dorothy knelt down, adjusting the flowers slightly before looking at the headstone. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft, but sure. "Hi, Mary." Raymond's breath hitched slightly. "I know we never met," Dorothy continued, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the stone. "But I feel like I've gotten to know you in the past few weeks." She offered a small, knowing smile, glancing at Raymond and Sean before turning back to the grave. "I wanted to say thank you," she said, "for leading me to them." Raymond swallowed, looking at Dorothy carefully. She wasn't saying these words for effect. She meant them. Dorothy exhaled, brushing a fallen leaf from the headstone. "I know they'll always love you, and they should. But I promise, I'm going to take care of them. Both of them." She glanced at Sean, then up at Raymond. "I hope that's okay with you." Raymond felt something in his chest tighten, not in grief, but in something else. A kind of acceptance, maybe. A quiet relief. Sean, for once, didn't make a joke. He knelt in front of the grave, tracing his fingers over the engraved letters of his mother's name. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quieter than usual. "We'll always love you, Mom," he murmured. "But we're ready to be happy again." Raymond let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. For years, he had carried the weight of loss, letting it shape his life in ways he hadn't realized. But now, standing here, with his son at his side and Dorothy's quiet presence beside him, he felt something shift. Not a goodbye, a promise. He turned his hand over, intertwining his fingers with Dorothy's. She didn't hesitate. For a long time, the three of them just stood there. No rush, no need for more words. Just the quiet understanding that After everything. They were finally moving forward. Together. The house felt different now. For years, it had been a place of quiet routines, neatly stacked papers on the desk, dinner at precisely 7, the faint hum of classical music drifting from Raymond's study. It had been a house of order, of predictability. And then, Dorothy happened. Now, the kitchen smelled of fresh-baked muffins because she claimed mornings should start with something sweet. The living room had throw pillows that weren't just for decoration, much to Raymond's mild horror. Sean had someone to argue with over ridiculous things, like whether pancakes or waffles were superior. Dorothy was firmly team pancakes, which Sean called an unforgivable offense. Raymond had expected the transition to feel strange, like an outsider moving into a space that had been untouched for so long. But Dorothy wasn't an outsider. She had settled in the way a missing puzzle piece clicks into place. Effortless, like she had always belonged. A new family. Dynamic. "All right, listen up," Sean declared dramatically one evening, standing on the couch with his hands on his hips. Raymond, seated on the armchair, lowered his book. "Sean, the furniture is not a stage." Sean ignored him. "We need to establish some new house rules now that Dorothy has officially moved in." Dorothy, curled up with a cup of tea, smirked. "Oh, this should be good." Sean held up a very official-looking notebook. "First, Dad is no longer the undisputed ruler of this house. He must now share authority with Dorothy." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "And you?" "Oh, I'm still a free agent," Sean said, flipping a page. "Second, Dorothy has co-parent privileges, meaning she can ground me, but only for minor offenses. Dad still handles major crimes." Dorothy laughed. "And what qualifies as major crimes?" Sean waved a hand. "You know, the usual. Setting the toaster on fire, accidentally ordering 50 pizzas on Dad's credit card, hacking into the neighbor's Wi-Fi." Raymond closed his eyes. "Please tell me you haven't actually done any of those things." "No comment," Sean said quickly. Dorothy chuckled, nudging Raymond's arm. "Looks like we have our hands full." Raymond sighed, but there was warmth in his gaze as he looked at them both. Yes, we do. Small moments, big changes. Somewhere along the way, Raymond found himself learning new things, like how Dorothy always hummed when she cooked, a habit she claimed she didn't realize she had, or how she somehow knew exactly when Sean needed to joke and when he needed a hug, or how she fit into his life in a way that made him wonder how he had ever thought of going through it without her. One evening, as they cleaned up after dinner, Dorothy nudged him lightly with her hip. "You okay?" Raymond glanced at her, then at Sean, who was in the other room reenacting an action movie scene with dramatic sound effects. "Yeah," he said, voice softer than usual. "I think I am." Dorothy smiled, drying her hands with a dish towel. "Good." She reached for a plate, but before she could grab it, Raymond took her hand instead. She blinked. "Ray?" Raymond exhaled slowly, searching for the right words. "Thank you felt too small. I love you felt too soon." So he settled for, "Stay." Dorothy squeezed his hand. "I'm not going anywhere. To walking into the future." A few days later, as the three of them walked through the park, Dorothy on one side, Sean on the other, Raymond felt a rare kind of peace. Sean swung their hands exaggeratedly. "So, what's next? Are you two going to get married? Adopt a dog? Get a reality show?" Dorothy laughed. "One step at a time, kid." Sean rolled his eyes. "Ugh, you adults are so slow." Raymond smirked. "Says the 10-year-old who takes 30 minutes to put on his shoes." Sean gasped. "Betrayal." Dorothy laughed again, shaking her head. "You two are impossible." But there was no frustration in her voice, just happiness. And as they walked, hand in hand, toward whatever came next, Raymond knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a new beginning, it was home. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. And if you enjoyed this story, please share it with your friends on WhatsApp. And now, share your feelings with us, and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.